One night in late 1967, the brand new Velda Rose Towers Hotel in Hot Springs, Arkansas, 10 stories of glass and steel, the most modern building between Memphis and Dallas, rented 10 of its 200 rooms. 10. A hotel that had opened just 3 years earlier to accommodate the 5 million visitors who poured into this little mountain town every year. A hotel financed in part by the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund because the smart money believed Hot Springs was about to become the most important resort city in America. And now a desk clerk sat alone in the lobby, watching a parking lot built for the future hold nothing but Arkansas rain. Something had happened to Hot Springs. Not a fire, not a flood, not a factory closing. Something worse. Something faster. A single veto, one man's signature on one piece of paper, had, in the span of a few months, undone 100 years of commerce, culture, and spectacularly profitable sin. To understand what was destroyed, you have to understand what was built. And to understand what was built, you have to go back to the water. 47 springs push through the western slope of Hot Springs Mountain in the Ouachita Range of central Arkansas. The water falls as rain, seeps thousands of feet into the earth, heats against deep rock, and rises back to the surface at a constant 143 degrees Fahrenheit, 700,000 gallons a day, every day, year after year, century after century. The Quapaw and Caddo peoples bathed in it long before Europeans arrived. Hernando de Soto's expedition may have encountered the springs as early as 1541. By the time American settlers reached the valley in the early 1800s, the hot water had already earned a reputation that would shape everything that followed. People believed it could heal you. In 1832, Andrew Jackson signed legislation creating the Hot Springs Reservation, the first time the federal government had ever set aside land to protect a natural resource. This was 20 years before Yellowstone, 40 years before the National Park Service existed. The government looked at these springs and decided they belonged to the nation. That decision gave Hot Springs something no other resort town in America possessed: a federal imprimatur. The springs weren't just hot water. They were government-certified hot water. And that made all the difference for the kind of people who would come to soak in them. The railroads arrived after the Civil War, and with the railroads came the hotels, and with the hotels came the money. Samuel Fordyce, a railroad executive whose name now adorns the grandest bathhouse on the row, helped finance the first Arlington Hotel in 1875, a 3-story wooden palace at the north end of what would become Bathhouse Row. The Arlington was the first true luxury hotel in the region, and it established the template. You came to Hot Springs for the water, but you stayed for everything else the hotels wrapped around it. A 100-room addition went up in 1880. By the 1890s, the wooden Arlington was torn down and replaced with a 500-guest brick structure that cost $550,000. Serious money for a small Arkansas town. The new Arlington had corner towers and formal dining rooms, and the unmistakable ambition of a city that believed it was going somewhere. When fire destroyed that second Arlington on April 5, 1923, it might have ended a lesser city's ambitions. Instead, Hot Springs rebuilt in 11 months. Construction began on October 25, 1923, across the street from the original site, no longer on federal property. The architect, the same man who designed the Arkansas State Capitol, gave it twin Mediterranean towers and over 500 guest rooms. When it opened on November 28, 1924, it boasted a crystal ballroom, a Venetian room, an Arthur Murray dance studio, roof gardens, a full-service gas station, a Western Union office, a drugstore with a soda fountain, and a 10-piece in-house orchestra. It was the largest hotel in the state, and it announced, with the subtlety of a brass band, that Hot Springs intended to be taken seriously. It was going somewhere, but not only in the direction its civic boosters imagined. As early as the 1870s, gambling had taken root alongside the bathhouses. A Canadian named Frank Flynn controlled most of the action by the 1880s, running casinos and brothels and paying local police enough to ensure they stayed incurious. Gambling was illegal under Arkansas law. Nobody cared. The visitors came for the water, discovered the card tables, and found that the combination of physical healing and financial risk produced a kind of euphoria that neither pursuit could manage alone. A man could soak away his rheumatism in the morning, bet on horses in the afternoon, and eat a steak dinner in a room full of strangers who had traveled 1,000 miles to do exactly the same thing. Hot Springs wasn't just a resort. It was a permission structure, a place where the normal rules of American life were temporarily suspended, and everyone present had agreed to the suspension. Two families, the Flynns and the Dorans, fought over control of the gambling rackets through the late 19th century, and their rivalry produced actual gunfights. On the morning of March 16, 1899, tensions between the city police department and the county sheriff's office over who would control the gambling profits erupted in a shootout at City Hall. It was, in its ugly way, proof of how valuable the vice economy had become. People don't kill each other over trivial revenue streams. But something else was happening on Central Avenue that would give Hot Springs a second identity, one far more wholesome and almost as improbable. In 1886, the front page of the inaugural issue of the Sporting News carried a notice that the Chicago White Stockings, forerunners of the Cubs, planned to conduct their spring training in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Team president A.G. Spaulding had decided his players needed warm weather and therapeutic baths to shake off what one reporter delicately called their winters of sedentary indulgence. The translation was simpler. The ball players drank too much in the off-season, and Spaulding wanted the hot springs to boil the alcohol out of them. It worked, or at least the team believed it worked. Other clubs followed. The Boston Red Sox built a practice field in 1909, Majestic Park, at Carson and Belding Streets. And for the next 3 decades, Hot Springs was one of the premier spring training destinations in baseball. More than 90 future Hall of Famers passed through town. Honus Wagner walked these streets. Cy Young soaked in these baths. And on St. Patrick's Day, 1918, a young Red Sox pitcher named Babe Ruth, given his first chance to play a position other than pitcher because of an injury on the roster, stepped up to bat at Whittington Park and hit a baseball so far it cleared the outfield fence, sailed over Whittington Avenue, and landed in the Arkansas Alligator Farm across the street. A modern engineering survey pegged the distance at 573 feet. The alligator ponds are still in the same spot. That home run, widely considered the first recorded blast over 500 feet in baseball history, began Ruth's transformation from pitcher to slugger. It happened in Hot Springs, Arkansas, because of course it did. Where else would the most extravagant athlete in American history discover his true talent except in the most extravagant small city in America? Central Avenue ran through the middle of all of it. On the west side, Bathhouse Row, the Fordyce, the Quapaw, the Buckstaff, the Maurice, the Ozark, the Lamar, the Hale, the Superior, 8 ornate temples to hydrotherapy, their facades of brick and tile and stained glass climbing the foot of the mountain. The Fordyce alone had 3 floors of marble, stained glass skylights, a gymnasium, a music room, and a bowling alley in the basement. These were not simple bathing facilities. They were palaces built for the specific purpose of convincing wealthy Americans that soaking in hot water was a medical treatment worth traveling 1,000 miles to receive. On the east side, the hotels and the clubs, the Arlington presiding from its perch at the north end, and below it the Southern Club, the Ohio Club, the Kentucky Club, a constellation of establishments where a man could drink, gamble, and watch the best entertainers in the country perform on small stages in rooms that smelled of cigar smoke and expensive cologne. Bathhouse Row was the face Hot Springs showed the world. Central Avenue's east side was the reason many of them actually came. In 1926, a local lawyer named Leo Patrick McLaughlin ran for mayor on a single promise. He would make Hot Springs an open city. He meant specifically that illegal gambling would not merely be tolerated but actively protected. McLaughlin won, and he delivered. Working with his allies Earl Witt and Vernal Ledgerwood, he built a political machine that controlled both city and county government for the next 2 decades. Voter fraud was routine. City employees were expected to contribute to his campaigns. Judges cooperated. Police cooperated. The entire apparatus of local government existed, in practical terms, to ensure that the casinos operated without interference and that the money flowed in the right directions. This was not some grubby backroom arrangement. McLaughlin transformed Hot Springs into a destination that rivaled anything in America. The gambling houses grew larger and more opulent. Entertainment improved. The hotels expanded. During the 1930s, at the height of the Depression, when most American cities were contracting, Hot Springs was booming. In 1931, a city of 16,000 residents welcomed roughly 15 times that many visitors. People came from Chicago, New York, St. Louis, Kansas City, Dallas. They came because the hot springs still drew the health-conscious, the horse races at Oaklawn Park drew the sporting crowd, and the casinos drew everyone else. They came because Hot Springs offered a quality of experience that almost no other American city could match. The natural beauty of the Ouachita Mountains, the elegance of the bathhouses, the thrill of the gambling floor, and the implicit guarantee that nobody would ask too many questions about anything. And then, in 1935, the most dangerous man in New York City moved to town. Owen Vincent Madden was born in Leeds, England, in 1891, the son of Irish immigrants. His family emigrated to New York when he was 11. By his 20s, he was one of the most feared gangsters in Manhattan, a bootlegger, a murderer, the owner of the Cotton Club in Harlem, a boxing promoter who controlled fighters and fixed bouts. His nickname was the Killer, and he had earned it. He'd been shot so many times that the accumulated damage to his body was beginning to slow him down. When the pressure from New York law enforcement became unbearable, Madden looked for a place to retire. He chose Hot Springs. The reason was partly geographic. Arkansas state laws at the time made it difficult for federal agents to operate, and partly practical. Hot Springs already had the infrastructure Madden understood: casinos, political protection, a local economy built on vice. But Madden didn't come to Hot Springs to run things the way he'd run things in New York. He came to disappear into a different kind of life. He married Agnes Demby, the postmaster's daughter. He bought a house at 506 West Grand Avenue. He tended a flower garden, a hobby he'd picked up working in the greenhouse at Sing Sing Prison. He and Agnes raised chickens and pigeons. Every morning, he visited the barber shop in the Arlington Hotel, took a bath in one of the National Park bathhouses, and spent the rest of his day in his usual seat at the Southern Club coffee shop, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. He was, by all accounts, a model citizen. He was also, by all accounts, the man who quietly controlled the gambling wire service in Hot Springs, served as a liaison between the local power structure and visiting mobsters from around the country, and ensured that the town's vice economy operated smoothly. Madden was the reason Al Capone could vacation in Hot Springs without incident, staying in Suite 443 at the Arlington, renting the entire fourth floor for his entourage. Madden was the reason Lucky Luciano could stroll down Bathhouse Row without fear of arrest. Madden was the reason Bugsy Siegel and Frank Costello and a parade of organized crime figures treated Hot Springs as neutral territory, a place where the usual rivalries were suspended and business could be discussed over mineral baths and poker. Capone had a routine at the Arlington that tells you everything about the scale of Hot Springs' delusions. The Southern Club sat directly across Central Avenue from the hotel, perhaps 100 feet away. Capone would order a taxi to take him from one to the other. When the driver pointed across the street and suggested he could walk, Capone growled, "Drive!" The driver went down the block, made a U-turn, and delivered Capone to the Arlington's entrance. Capone tipped the young driver $10, a princely sum in the 1930s, while a car full of FBI agents followed helplessly behind. That was Hot Springs in miniature, absurd, lavish, criminal, and so confident in its own arrangements that even the federal government seemed like a minor inconvenience. The arrangements survived even the end of McLaughlin's reign. In 1946, a group of veterans returning from World War II, led by a young Marine named Sid McMath, organized what became known as the GI Revolt. They ran a reform ticket against the McLaughlin machine, exposed the voter fraud, and won. McMath would go on to become governor of Arkansas. But here's the thing about Hot Springs that outsiders never quite understood. Removing McLaughlin didn't end the gambling. It barely interrupted it. The casinos closed briefly, then reopened. The economic logic was too powerful. Too many people in Garland County made their living, directly or indirectly, from the gambling industry. Hotels, restaurants, gas stations, dress shops, barber shops, parking lots, the entire service economy depended on visitors, and the visitors came for the tables. Even the city government taxed the casinos, openly, despite their illegality. When the city needed more revenue, the gambling operators were expected to pay more, and they did willingly, because the alternative, actually being shut down, was unthinkable to everyone involved. Through the 1950s, the gambling economy grew larger. William Stockley Jacobs, a Memphis operator who held interests in 6 hot springs clubs, including the Kentucky, the Ohio, the Southern, and the Belvedere, installed the city's first escalator in the Southern Club, a small detail that tells a large story. You install an escalator when you expect your customers to be so numerous and so well-heeled that walking upstairs would be an unacceptable inconvenience. Jacobs understood his clientele. The Southern Club's 10.5-foot wide marble staircase was beautiful, but the escalator was better business. The peak of the bathing industry had passed in 1946, more than 1 million baths taken that year. And the numbers declined steadily after that as medical science moved away from hydrotherapy. But the decline of bathing was more than offset by the explosion of gambling. The bathhouses were what brought people originally. The casinos were what kept them coming back. And in 1960, a local man named Dane Harris opened a nightclub that represented the apex of everything Hot Springs had spent a century building toward. The Vapors stood at 315 Park Avenue on the site of a former drive-in restaurant. Harris was an unlikely impresario, a World War II pilot, the son of a Cherokee bootlegger, quiet and ambitious in a way that didn't announce itself. He'd accumulated capital from a stake in the Belvedere Country Club and Casino during the 1950s, and he'd partnered with Owney Madden to build something that would rival anything in Las Vegas or New York. The Vapors had a coffee shop, a Monte Carlo room for private events, a theater restaurant with tiered seating, a retractable stage large enough for a full orchestra, crystal chandeliers, shag carpet throughout, a mahogany bar, and, opening late each evening after the dinner shows, a casino. 2 shows a night. Mickey Rooney performed there. Edgar Bergen, Patti Page, Les Paul, Phyllis Diller, Liberace, the Smothers Brothers. The Vapors employed 200 people and was the jewel in a crown that included the Southern Club, the Belvedere, and the Arlington's own gambling operation. And then, one night in December 1961, something happened at the Vapors that had nothing to do with gambling, but would become one of the most famous moments in American music. Tony Bennett was performing a run of shows at the club. His musical director, Ralph Sharon, had been carrying around a piece of sheet music written years earlier by 2 struggling songwriters in Brooklyn, a composition with the working title, When I Come Home, that nobody had wanted. Sharon noticed the title had been changed to I Left My Heart in San Francisco, and since their tour was heading next to the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, he thought the song might make a nice local number for that audience. After their last show at the Vapors one night, Bennett and Sharon found themselves at the Black Orchid Lounge, nearly alone. Only the bartender, a 26-year-old named C.B. Sonny Hudson, was with them. Sharon pulled the sheet music from his pocket. Bennett walked to the piano. They ran through the song once. Hudson, setting up glasses behind the bar, looked up and said, "Tony, if you ever record that, I'll be first in line to buy a copy." A few days later, Bennett sang the song publicly for the first time at the Venetian Room in San Francisco. Columbia Records executives heard it and demanded he record it immediately. I Left My Heart in San Francisco became one of the best-selling singles of 1962, won 2 Grammy Awards, and remained Bennett's signature song for the rest of his 60-year career. It was born in an illegal casino in Arkansas, rehearsed for an audience of 1 bartender, and the bartender's review was the most accurate in the history of popular music. That's the kind of place Hot Springs was. It was the kind of place where things like that happened, because it attracted a concentration of talent, money, and ambition that no town of its size had any business attracting. And in 1959, Dane Harris had been given the chance to take his talents somewhere else, to become a partner in the Frontier Casino in Las Vegas, and he had turned it down. He couldn't imagine that the dusty, sun-scorched desert of southern Nevada was a better bet than the green mountains and thermal waters of Hot Springs. When he visited Las Vegas with his family, he saw dingy saloons and half-built hotels in a valley where summer temperatures reached 115 degrees, and the nearest body of natural water was Lake Mead, a man-made reservoir. Hot Springs had everything Las Vegas didn't: beauty, history, infrastructure, a century of tourism, a loyal customer base stretching from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes. Harris looked at Las Vegas and saw a mirage. He went home to the Vapors. That decision, Harris's personal decision, one businessman's reading of the odds, was a small version of the larger bet Hot Springs was making. By the early 1960s, the city was locked in what amounted to an arms race with Las Vegas. Both cities were competing for the same pool of investment money, much of it flowing from two sources: the gambling operations in Cuba, orphaned by Castro's revolution, and the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, which had already invested more than $120 million in real estate projects and was prepared to pour much more into casino development. Jimmy Hoffa himself had directed Teamsters loans into high-profile Hot Springs hotel projects like the Jack Tar Hotel and the Aristocrat Manor. By 1964, more than $18 million worth of hotel construction was underway in Hot Springs, and the city was drawing over 5 million visitors a year. The Velda Rose Towers, that 10-story modernist slab of steel and glass, was among the new buildings rising along Park Avenue, designed to accommodate a future that everyone in Garland County considered inevitable. But that future depended on one thing Hot Springs had never managed to secure: legality. Everything: the casinos, the wire service, the employment of thousands, the tax revenue, the hotel bookings, rested on an understanding that the law would simply not be enforced. And understandings, unlike laws, can evaporate. In February 1964, two senior attorneys from the U.S. Department of Justice traveled to Hot Springs. They toured the casinos, which were operating in plain sight, and the next morning held a press conference in which they declared that Hot Springs was the site of the largest illegal gambling operation in the United States. The statement was devastating not because it contained news everyone already knew, but because it signaled that federal patience had run out. The attorneys threatened prosecution. Governor Orville Faubus, who had turned a blind eye for years, was finally forced to act. On Saturday night, March 28, 1964, the casinos voluntarily closed after one last profitable evening of serving hundreds of customers. But the gambling didn't die, not yet. As historian Roy Reed later wrote, "Like a copperhead with its tail cut off, gambling took a long time to die. The casinos reopened intermittently. State police raids came and went, often more theater than enforcement. The gambling operators knew the game. Close for a few weeks, wait for the heat to pass, reopen. They'd been doing this for decades. What they needed was a permanent solution, not continued tolerance, but actual legalization. If gambling were legal in Garland County, the federal government would have no basis for prosecution. Corporate money could flow in openly, and Hot Springs could compete with Las Vegas on equal terms." In 1964, a ballot measure, Constitutional Amendment 55, was placed before Arkansas voters. It would have legalized casino gambling in Garland County. The gambling operators mounted an aggressive campaign. Dane Harris invested heavily, arguing that legal gambling would transform Hot Springs into America's own Monte Carlo, a place that the whole world could come and comfortably enjoy the best America had to offer. He spoke of culture, of sophistication, of economic development. He sounded like a Chamber of Commerce president because, in a sense, he was one. An enthusiastic member, as Sports Illustrated noted with some amusement in a 1962 profile. Against him stood the churches. The Christian Civic Foundation, successor to the Temperance League of Arkansas, organized churches united against gambling. Their advertisements called legal gambling a stark picture of moral wrong, economic wastefulness, political corruption, social destructiveness, and educational deception. Dr. William Brown, a 75-year-old retired preacher, thundered from the pulpit of Grand Avenue Methodist Church. "On behalf of your children and yourselves, remove this cancer from your county. God save us from a Las Vegas in the heart of Arkansas." The ministers won. Amendment 55 was defeated 247,978 to 166,626. Harris, asked for his reaction, delivered a line that contained more sadness than bitterness. "We're 49th and 50th in everything. I guess we'll just stay that way. Proud but poor." The defeat of Amendment 55 was a body blow, but it wasn't the killing stroke. The gambling operators could have continued as they had before, illegally, profitably, with periodic interruptions. What they could not survive was what happened next. In 1966, Winthrop Rockefeller ran for governor of Arkansas. He was the grandson of John D. Rockefeller Sr., a Yale man, a decorated World War II veteran, and a Republican, the first serious Republican candidate for governor since Reconstruction. He had moved to Arkansas in the 1950s, bought a cattle ranch on Pétition Mountain, and set about reinventing himself as an Arkansan. He ran once in 1964, lost, and ran again in 1966. This time he won, defeating the old Democratic machine that had governed the state under Orval Faubus for 12 years. During his campaign, Rockefeller was asked about gambling. He criticized Faubus for looking the other way, but he also indicated, or at least the gambling operators believed he indicated, that he would support a legalization bill if the legislature passed one. This understanding, whether real or imagined, was the foundation on which Hot Springs' entire future rested. Rockefeller took office on January 10, 1967. Almost immediately, State Senator Q. Byrum Hurst, a Hot Springs native, a veteran of the G1 Revolt, who had since become the gambling industry's most important legislative ally, drafted a bill to legalize gambling at private clubs in Garland County. The bill would allow one casino for every 15,000 county residents. The state would collect a tax. A crime commission under the governor would regulate the industry. It was, on paper, a reasonable framework. The bill passed both houses of the Arkansas legislature, though barely, and then Winthrop Rockefeller vetoed it. The veto stunned the gambling operators, the legislators who had voted for the bill, and much of Garland County. Legislators who had supported the measure insisted they would never have voted for it had they not believed Rockefeller would sign it. Some publicly renounced their votes to align with statewide public sentiment, which, thanks to the churches, ran strongly against gambling. Rockefeller denied ever having promised to support the bill. He claimed he was unaware of it until it was formally introduced. He speculated that the misunderstanding arose from an earlier meeting where several topics had been discussed, including gambling and the legalization of mixed drinks. Whatever the truth of those private conversations, the public consequences were immediate and total. Rockefeller appointed Lynn Davis, a former FBI agent, as director of the Arkansas State Police, with a single mandate: end gambling in Hot Springs. Davis and his troopers descended on the city. They raided the casinos. They seized the equipment, the roulette wheels, the craps tables, the slot machines, the card tables, the wire service apparatus. They didn't simply confiscate it. They burned it, and then they buried what was left 20 feet underground. The raids were the #1 news story in Arkansas in 1967, as determined by the Associated Press. They were sensational, theatrical, and final. The gambling operators fought back in every way they could. Hurst tried legislative maneuvers to strip the state police of their authority. The Arkansas Supreme Court forced Davis out after 128 days, ruling he didn't meet a strict 10-year residency requirement. Democratic lawmakers refused to change the rule to keep him. And according to testimony that emerged later, someone hired a man named Zakar Giroux to sabotage the governor's private airplane. Giroux passed multiple polygraph tests. Rockefeller's plane had nearly crashed in Memphis earlier that year when a bar was wedged into the landing gear. A second plane was found to have been tampered with during a routine inspection. Rockefeller called both incidents sabotage. The gambling interests were not going quietly, but they were going. By late 1967, the casinos were closed for good, and the consequences arrived with a speed that astonished even those who had predicted them. The Velda Rose, that gleaming monument to the future, emptied almost overnight. 10 rooms out of 200. The hotels that had been booked solid during racing season and through the summer gambling months sat vacant. Restaurants closed, shops closed. The service workers, the bartenders, the waitresses, the valets, the cooks, the card dealers, the musicians, the parking attendants who earned tips from gamblers' Cadillacs, found themselves without employment in a small mountain town with no other major industry. Owney Madden, for his part, never saw the end. He died of emphysema on April 24, 1965, 2 years before the final raids, and was buried in Greenwood Cemetery beside Agnes. He was 73. He had tended his garden that morning. The Vapors tried to survive without gambling, continuing as a nightclub and restaurant. Dane Harris, ever resourceful, renovated in 1977, adding a disco and an additional showroom. But a nightclub without a casino in a town without visitors is a difficult business. Harris died in 1981. The Vapors limped on through the 1990s, a lackluster shadow of its former self, and was finally sold in October 1998 to Tower of Strength Ministries for use as a church. The building where Tony Bennett first tried I Left My Heart in San Francisco became a house of worship. The irony writes itself, but the people who lived through it didn't find it amusing. The Southern Club, once the most popular gambling house on Central Avenue, the place where Owney Madden drank his coffee every afternoon, where the first escalator in Hot Springs carried well-dressed gamblers to the second floor, became Josephine Tussaud's Wax Museum in 1971, where roulette wheels had spun. Wax figures of Abraham Lincoln and Elvis Presley stood in frozen poses behind velvet ropes. The Ohio Club, at 336 Central Avenue, founded in 1905, the oldest bar in Arkansas, where Al Capone met local bookies and Lucky Luciano conferred with the chief of detectives, survived. It's still there today, selling burgers and cold beer, its walls covered in photographs of the gangsters who once drank at its bar. It never closed its doors. Not during Prohibition, not during the raids, not during the long, quiet decades after. There is a particular cruelty in what happened to Hot Springs, and it lies in the comparison that became unavoidable. While Hot Springs' casinos were being burned and buried, Las Vegas was being born. In 1940, fewer than 10,000 people lived in Las Vegas. Gambling was legal in Nevada, but took place mostly in dingy saloons. By 1960, the population had surpassed 130,000, and nearly 10 million tourists were visiting annually, gambling $100 million a year and spending another $150 million on hotels, food, and entertainment. In 1967 and 1969, the exact years Hot Springs was being dismantled, Nevada passed laws allowing corporate ownership of casinos. Those laws changed everything. They opened the door for legitimate money. Wall Street money, pension fund money, publicly traded company money, to flow into Las Vegas without the taint of organized crime. The corporations brought professionalism, scale, and marketing budgets that no individual gambling operator could match. In 1971, Hilton Hotels purchased the International Hotel in Las Vegas. Within 5 years, 43% of Hilton's revenues from all of its 163 hotels worldwide came from Las Vegas alone. The desert was printing money. Hot Springs, meanwhile, was trying to reinvent itself as a family resort. A new amusement park opened. A $7 million science museum was built. The bathhouses marketed themselves to tourists who were increasingly skeptical of hydrotherapy's medical claims. Oaklawn Park, the horse racing track that had operated since 1905, became the city's lifeline, the one form of legal gambling that had survived Rockefeller's purge. Tourists who came for the races spent more than $200 million a year in Garland County and supported over 5,000 jobs. But by the mid-1980s, attendance was declining as other states legalized their own forms of gambling. Arkansas's unemployment rate sat at 8%, nearly double the national average, and state employment officials credited Oaklawn with preventing it from being even worse. In 1984, Dane Harris's son, Dane Harris Jr., 28 years old, carrying his father's fight, led another campaign to legalize casino gambling in Arkansas. The same coalition of churches reorganized, this time as Citizens United Against Gambling. The measure was defeated again. The younger Harris sounded like his father, hopeful, reasonable, and heartbroken. In 1989, a developer named Steve Wynn opened the Mirage in Las Vegas, a $630 million, 3,000-room resort that was, at the time, the biggest and most expensive hotel in the world. The Mirage proved that a casino could make money from more than just gambling. World-class restaurants, luxury shopping, a 1,500-seat showroom. Convention business replaced weekend gamblers as the economic engine. Gambling revenue on the Las Vegas Strip dropped from 60% of total revenue to less than half. Las Vegas was transforming from Sin City to America's premier resort destination, precisely the kind of place Dane Harris had dreamed Hot Springs could be. By 1996, the population of Las Vegas exceeded 1 million. 7,000 new people were arriving every month. The thing Dane Harris wanted for Hot Springs in 1960, a legitimate world-class resort built on gambling revenue but offering far more than gambling, was coming to life in Las Vegas 25 years later. And Hot Springs had been better positioned. Its mountains were green, not barren. Its water was natural, not pumped from a dam. Its location, in the center of the country, was accessible to more Americans than a desert valley at the far western edge of Nevada. If you had told a visitor to both cities in 1959 that one of them would someday have 1 million residents, the largest hotels on earth, and billions of dollars in investment, that visitor would have put their money on Hot Springs. Dane Harris put his money on Hot Springs, and Dane Harris was wrong. Not because the city lacked potential, but because one man's veto, backed by a coalition of preachers and a political calculation made in Little Rock, foreclosed a future that the desert was only too happy to claim. There is a footnote to this story that is almost too on the nose to be true, but it is true. While Owney Madden was drinking coffee at the Southern Club, and Dane Harris was booking entertainers at the Vapors, and Tony Bennett was rehearsing songs at the Black Orchid Lounge, a boy was growing up a few blocks away. His name was Bill Clinton. He lived at 1011 Park Avenue. Park Avenue, the same street where the Vapors stood, in a Tudor revival house his family had moved into in 1954. His mother, Virginia, liked to place $2 bets on the horses at Oaklawn Park. Young Bill played the saxophone and was beginning to think about politics. He attended Hot Springs High School. He would later become governor of Arkansas and then president of the United States. He grew up surrounded by everything this story contains: the bathhouses, the casinos, the gangsters, the music, the money, the particular combination of glamour and corruption that made Hot Springs unlike any other town in America. He once said that Hot Springs taught him that people were complicated, that good and bad could coexist in the same person, the same institution, the same city. After the gambling died, Harris tried his hand at running a casino in Istanbul. He ran into religious objections there, too. Muslims this time, rather than Southern Baptists. He came home. He died in 1981. Madden was already in the ground at Greenwood Cemetery, beside Agnes, the postmaster's daughter who had married the most dangerous man in New York and spent 30 years raising chickens with him in Arkansas. It took more than half a century, but Arkansas voters finally passed a constitutional amendment legalizing casino gambling in 2018. Oaklawn has undergone a $100 million expansion, a hotel, a convention center, a casino that bears no resemblance to the plush gambling dens of the old days, but that represents, at long last, the legal framework the city fought for and lost in 1964 and 1967. Even the governor who opposed the measure praised it as one of the largest tourism-related projects in state history. Whether it is 57 years too late is a question Hot Springs will answer in its own time. Central Avenue is still there. Bathhouse Row still climbs the slope of the mountain, its 8 facades gleaming after a federal restoration. The Fordyce Bathhouse serves as the visitor center for Hot Springs National Park. The Buckstaff still offers baths. The Superior Bathhouse has become a brewery, making craft beer with the same 143-degree thermal water that drew the Quapaw and the railroads and the ball players and the gangsters. The Arlington still stands at the head of the row, 11 stories of Spanish colonial revival, its twin towers visible from every direction, renovated in a $30 million project completed in recent years. It has almost 500 rooms. On a good weekend, most of them are full. The Velda Rose sat empty for years, a 10-story monument to an argument that was lost. It was recently added to the National Register of Historic Places. Honored, finally, for the architecture rather than the economy it was built to serve. The Ohio Club pours drinks at 336 Central Avenue, the oldest bar in Arkansas, its walls hung with photographs of men who are all dead now. A statue of Al Capone stands near the entrance. Inside, there's live music on Thursday nights. The burgers are excellent. At 315 Park Avenue, the Vapors reopened as a live music venue called Vapors Live. The retractable stage is gone. The crystal chandeliers are gone. The casino is a memory. But on certain nights, when the room fills and the band hits its stride and the crowd presses close to the stage, you can almost imagine what it must have sounded like on a December night in 1961. When a bartender setting up glasses in an empty lounge heard a singer at a piano try a song for the first time and said the only thing that needed saying.